Matrix Live. Guess who? It is Ben here, and we've got Half-Shot, who is Will,
Hello.
who does bridges, and he hasn't been doing that much bridges lately, but then you've gone back to it very recently. Is that right?
It's been a bit of a rebrand phase, yeah. I
Mhm.
was doing rebrand for a bit, as you do, bit of paid integrations, and now I'm back doing bridges again.
Paid integrations. You mean you've been doing open source for money?
Yeah, I know. It's weird you get paid for this stuff, right?
Yeah, somebody has to get paid.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're kind of back on the bridge side, and I guess you've got a few new things going on. I saw you post something about Figma, but that's quite small.
We can talk about it. It only takes 5 seconds. Basically, Nad from design came to me before lunch on Wednesday and said, I really wish we could bridge Figma to our design room. And I was like, that sounds pretty easy. So there's actually a webhook for Figma you can just basically listen on.
What's Figma?
And then oh, yes. No one actually knows what Figma is. It's our design tool for basically mocking up Matrix UIs and things. So when you're designing Element, we have like a big mock-up app. It's a bit like Illustrator, I guess, for the web, maybe is a loose way of explaining it.
It's pretty good though.
Nice.
It can output directly to CSS, and if you like, it can intelligently. It's object oriented in a design fashion, so it's actually really cool.
It does CSS and all sorts. It's brilliant. I mean, if you just want to copy your CSS from your design app to the actual thing you're building, it's pretty damn neat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of how a lot of websites are put together. That's so what you've done is bridge the comments module of that.
So the first attempt is basically we're bridging comments that you make on Figma onto Matrix, because turns out if you're a design team, you want to be able to see stuff appearing in live. Figma, not being a chat system, doesn't have great notification support. Sort of, it appears in the top left, sort of Facebook style, but it's not like a push system, so you don't get them. So I guess what we've done is sort of cribbed Matrix into sort of like a push system for Figma.
Yeah,
possibly.
Yeah,
it's nice, works.
Well, and persistence across, because Figma's screen based, I guess.
Yeah.
So now you've got it. Not only that, but you've got it aggregated, and presumably this is a first version. You can filter and do all the good stuff later.
Oh yes. Oh, the first one's brilliant. I'm quite proud of this.
Oh.
We use Matrix Room State to do all the configuration for this bridge. There is about 5 configuration options that you do through command line, which is just tokens and things. But all the routing is all done through state. So as the bridge starts up, it pulls all the room state it knows about from all the rooms it's in, and goes, okay, some of these rooms have special Figma room state. Let's route this type of comment to this room. And it basically means you can configure it on the fly through Matrix Room State, the dev tools, which is really handy because you can do all sorts of crazy things with Room State. And so, for example, if you're like me and accidentally lost access to your production system for a week, and then you build it on a different system, all comes straight back up.
Shouldn't we always be doing that? Why don't we do more stuff in that way?
So I do for pretty much all my non-real-time type bots. The bridges, like RFC bridge, is a bit trickier, especially due to the scale of it. It's about 40,000 bridged rooms.
Right.
So if you try, it's not impossible to get that startup. It might still make sense. But there is a certain amount of management to this. So you want to be able to manage lots of rooms. For example, unbridging rooms. There are reasons why large-scale Postgres is a decent option. But for small scale, like you're doing Figma, do it that way. I actually would suggest to everyone building a bridge right now, if you don't want to think about databases or SQLite or AnyDB, you just want to build a bridge, use room state or account data. Travis has actually done this for his Molgino bot as well, I believe. So
right, yeah, loads, and configuration and room state. I mean, the problem is, of course, you have to store the access token outside at some point.
Yeah,
so
it's not too bad. You're just using environment variable in our case. So for me, it's a Docker image. So you just literally stick it in the env section and say, hey. So it's not the best. You can technically get around this by using account data if you wanted, and stick some tokens in account data. But for security,
all you're doing is managing. All you're doing is moving the management from one point to another. It doesn't really.
But the advantage is you ain't got to run 2 databases now, or 2 file systems. One of the biggest problems we have with the earlier bridges is we had all the database stored on disk. And backing up disk files is hard. I actually deleted the disk file once by accident, and that was a lot of fun.
I remember that, like 3 a.m. or something, 2 a.m.
Yeah. I was like, have I fucked up for a moment? My job's still intact, I think, at the moment. But it was fun.
That was a long time ago.
It's much harder to delete or room state. Yeah. Also, room state hangs around forever, so it's actually very difficult to delete room state. For better or worse. So it's a better system, and it saves management. Sure, you're managing a database, but you're managing your Synapse database. And shout out something like EMS, then your database is managed by somebody else.
Yep.
Suddenly, you haven't got to worry about that. So If you're building a bot and you don't want to deal with storage stuff, Room State is definitely a good option. I'd suggest.
All right, we should say other providers are available.
Yes, at least 2 others.
But that's not actually what you wanted to talk about. What you've been working on is GitHub bots, and then you'll need to explain to me exactly what you've done here because I didn't understand it the first time.
That's good. So the Matrix GitHub bridge essentially allows you to bridge GitHub and now GitLab repos and issues into Matrix, sort of a bit like GoNeb. The difference is it uses, again, Room State to manage all this stuff with some quite crazy routing patterns, like you can stick all sorts of things in different rooms. But also you can bridge whole GitHub repos as virtual rooms, like as an RSC channel. So you don't need to connect it to an existing room, and you can see the comments coming in as bridged as actual people rather than just one bot. So you've got this nice quirky bridge things. But I basically went a bit crazy with this project and built it to scale up very early on. So it doesn't use a standard single process thing. It uses a message queue for passing data around. And of course, message queues mean you can separate the processes out. So the way the GitHub bridge essentially works is you have a Redis in the middle that passes this message between all the processes. And so you can quite easily scale this thing up to support multiple process building. It also does monolith and have like a fake message queue inside, which I run for my personal one. But the idea is if we did have like GoNeb today, we have hundreds of thousands of connections. Suddenly you can do many processes to manage this stuff, which is handy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how many people are using the GitHub bridge in Anger right now then? Because I mean, I know I've been using it for a while, but that was in its previous in version.
It's still growing because I've not spent a lot of time. Like it's still quite early days. I mean, just now I'm thinking of maybe sticking a version out because at the moment it's not even versions. So I'm thinking maybe for Twim tomorrow there'll be a version like 0.1 out, which contains quite a lot of features. To be fair.
Okay.
The other important thing that's worth mentioning is it does notification bridging, which one of the things that GoNeb doesn't do, which is where it tells you on Matrix if you have notification, you can do some filtering with that as well.
Yeah. Oh, I mean that's the main value of it for me. I've taken to using a room to replace my github.com/notifications.
I mean, I admit it's not for everyone. It has health concerns such as your GitHub repo, GitHub messages are permanently streaming to your phone. Not so great. So I would recommend sticking some sensible push notification rules on it. But it's also quite handy because GitHub hasn't got the best notification UX, and I tend to find that Matrix is a much better way of just expressing that.
Definitely. I mean, even as somebody who isn't writing code all day, I find it quite exhausting the amount of volume that you get on GitHub notifications. Okay, so how does this relate to your thoughts on IRC or the IRC bridge?
Yes, the IRC bridge has got a quite difficult problem. It's one of the only bridges we've got where the event loop is being saturated by its message capacity, or bandwidth rather. So it's hitting the point where it takes about 100 milliseconds for an event loop to actually process one iteration. An event loop, as you know, is meant to go very, very quickly to process incoming messages. So Node is essentially hitting its capacity to handle what we're doing with the bridge on a single process. So the moment I'm trying to investigate ways in which you pull that load off onto separate processes to handle the messages. It's much harder with this bridge because it's actually quite a late, basically not in beta bridge anymore. It's quite complex. It's got a lot of functionality. Splitting this thing out is hard. So a message queue might work, but it's actually quite a lot to do. So instead, we're using what we call worker threads, which is a fairly, I think Node.js 12 included them. It's basically you have a separate event loop, but you have a, what do you call it? A pipe between the processes. And also you can share memory. That's probably the killer feature there. You can essentially have shared objects between the two processes, essentially.
Okay, so it's really multi-threaded is the message.
It's multi-threaded in the sense that it basically is 2 event loops. Okay. So if you're saturating one event loop, you can now stick across 2 event loops. And so this is how we're trying to progress this design to sort of have many event loops to handle the IRC bridge.
Okay, so that sounds to me like it would immediately double performance on the IRC bridge. Is that correct?
Yeah, the goal is essentially we'll get down to like 10 millisecond worst case performance over 100, so like a 10-fold improvement. This is all totally achievable as well. In fact, it probably take priority over our contract experiments from before. Whereas contract was a very ambitious, we can have a connection process manager project. This is much more, we're just going to take the existing bridge and split it up a bit more. I'm making it sound easy. It's not actually easy to split up this process. It's because there's a lot of dependencies on things being in the right place.
Yeah.
But Easy wins are, for example, we moved the metrics processing out to a separate process.
Mhm.
Obviously not a high thing, but it's nice to have real-time metrics. So if one of your processes does spin to itself to death, you've still got metrics being processed. So Grafana can still see actually accurate stats.
Right. Okay.
Matrix message handling is a nice easy one to stick onto a separate process because, or outbound anyway, because you're just doing REST requests. So you can at least save some memory there. RSC connections themselves are actually, for the most part, they're just event listeners, in the sense the messages all come through event listeners. So you can easily stick that onto a separate process.
Okay.
So there are a lot of ways you can split this
Yeah,
away.
I mean, but the event loop is the current bottleneck, though. I understand.
Yes, essentially what we're doing is we're just connecting so many connections to the bridge on the RSC side and on Matrix side and current messages that you're actually, there's a lot of stuff waiting on the event loop, and it's building up and building up and building up. And if you have, for example, a net split, it's pretty much game over because suddenly you've got so much traffic you can't even deal with it. So it's not a bad problem to have in a sense. You know, we're at this point, the bridge is so popular that we're having traffic issues on a single process. But
So where are we in the? I say we. Where are you in the process of actually getting this built? And
so we built the basic framework for doing worker threads. So we have one worker thread already for the metrics processing, which is, you know, an easy win.
Right. Okay. So now you definitely know when it's broken because the metrics are working. Okay.
Yeah. So we actually have a metric for all the metrics down, which gets reported, which is brilliant.
Great. I didn't.
But yeah, it's to basically stop the ops team from being woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning. So, you know, it's a nice thing to have. But we've also going to split out things like matrix event sending, because again, that's an easy one to do. It's just moving it to a separate place. In with all this, we want to at some point move to Travis's bot SDK, because there's just less latency between handling stuff. Because it isn't using the JS SDK, it's using a very thin layer. And I think it will give us a very slight performance boost just by not having so many copaths, I'm hoping.
Interesting. I didn't realize that you were dependent on the JS SDK. I mean, the JS SDK has a lot of heavyweight client style features that you're almost certainly not using.
Yeah. So, for example, so Matrix App Service Bridge is the core library for most of our Matrix bridges. And the way that works is it uses the JS SDK and creates new clients for each connection or for each user. So every time an RSC user speaks, it creates a new JS SDK instance for that user, which might only hang around for about 10 seconds.
How does it know when to how does it know when to drop the clients?
There's a timer to sort of, so obviously the clients are Matrix clients, they can be dropped without, you know, connection issues. But, you know, we have a timer basically just like obliterating these out of memory. But the problem with this is the time taken to instantiate these these intent objects, as we call them, can be 10, 50 milliseconds maybe.
Right. Okay.
And if that builds up, then you've suddenly got especially on a process that relies on being asynchronous to deal with this whole event loop bottlenecking. Because the problem with the event loop is not just a number of things we're trying to do, but a number of things which will block the process as it's working. Because of course, Node.js is it's single threaded in the sense that you can't do multiple operations concurrently. So if you were processing something on the thread, you have to wait for it to finish before you can do the next task.
Yeah.
So anything we can do to block that process and do more things asynchronously, such as just doing less work.
I mean, so if two people were only talking on the network, then you would only have these two clients. But if 50 people say one message each, then you're constantly spawning and despawning clients. That's okay.
Yeah. And it gets a little crazy. So there are things we can do. The nice way with the bridge is there's lots of things we can do to improve it. It's mostly just time spent getting through all these things. I am happy to report that for the most part, the bridge is doing pretty well, given the amount of influx of users we've had recently, especially over the new announcements for Element. Things have been pretty good. Stability's been mostly
I don't think I've heard a lot of complaining in that area for a while now. So what about the message queues from the GitHub project? Is that something that will profit the IRC bridge or any bridge?
Yeah, it's definitely something I want to sort of use for more bridges. In fact, I had a vague idea of incorporating the Figma bridge into the GitHub bridge because the patterns they use are very similar. You have a webhook coming in, and then you're sending a message to Matrix. In fact, a lot of the CI, GitHub, all these sorts of applications all follow the same pattern of webhook in, message out.
Yeah, I
message
mean, what
in, do something.
Yeah,
this
yeah.
sort
I
of
mean,
thing.
absolutely. It's yeah. Why we reinvent the wheel? I think Figma have
So,
made the right choice. Yeah.
and to be honest, it's a really shame I've called it Matrix GitHub and does not Matrix Dev Bridge or something
Right.
ridiculous. Because honestly, it's such a, especially since the recent refactors I've done, it's such a malleable bridge.
Okay.
That you
Well,
could
it's
use it
not
for
too
many
late.
different
You
things.
you weren't you haven't even done a 0.1 release yet. So
I know. I'm just trying to think of the right name that describes all these different projects under one hat. So I can't use Mailbox, that's taken, so it had to be something else like I don't know.
yeah.
Send your suggestions to Twim basically and give me a good suggestion for what I'm
Cool.
going to call
All
this
right.
thing.
All right. We should talk about that.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, but the message queues could inform other bridges, but you've got a lot. You've got other stuff to think about first.
Yeah, so it's basically one size doesn't fit all. I mean, one of the things we found with Bifrost is it's not necessarily easy just to make one bridge that fits every single use case. So there are reasons to use message queues and things to use more interlocked worker threads as well. And there's no right way of doing this. There's different experiments work for different types of things. But I'm happy to say on both, at least on the message queue side stuff, it's worked really well. Jury's still out on worker threads because it's still early days. We've done obviously metrics, but properly segregating the bridge is
I mean,
hard.
unless it turns out to be prohibitively difficult to do the implementation, it seems like a no-brainer that this will eventually lead to great performance improvements.
Yeah, that's the hope anyway. We'll have to see how it goes, but we'll find out.
And I mean, presumably we are coming to a limit of how much IRC traffic we will ever have to cope with. Right, I hope.
The IRC networks aren't exactly growing,
No.
and the number of connections that we have at the moment is limited to a reasonable size. So I can't expect our traffic to get much higher. I'd hope that we'd be able to still spin up more bridges as we need to for other networks in the future, especially as we're going to start, giving these to EMS customers who will be using bridges at some point as well.
Yeah.
So there are reasons to keep the performance improving. But right now, we're not expecting a huge influx of traffic, at least from the RSC direction. And to be honest, probably not from the Matrix direction, because we're getting better at managing the number of users.
Understood.
But even so, there's reasons to improve performance.
So yeah. There's not a reason not to do it. I'm just thinking that there is a ceiling, a ceiling of reward. All right, cool. All right, so that's what you've been doing, at least in bridges. Anything else on your mind? Any other topics you wanted to?
Not much. I mean, spec stuff. There's been plenty of spec things going on. So the RSC information spec things still going on. So this is basically where you have the actual your client tells you which bridges you're connected to through the UI. Quite handy to have. I'm going to experiment with putting that into the public directory of rooms. So before you connect to a room, it'll say to you, "Hey, by the way, this is on RSC. Do you want to continue?"
Nice.
Which is a very easy thing to add, as it turns out. You just have to specify in terms configuration you want to include this extra information.
Is that not the same? Oh, no. Okay, so the bridge status stuff is actually in room state, not in...
Yeah.
Okay, so that doesn't need spec. Okay, cool. Sorry. I mean, if we had peaking over Federation, then you could use it.
Oh, if you're peaking Federation, so many things would be brilliant with bridges. That you could do so much fun stuff. That will happen. I mean, extensible profiles as well would be another thing you could do.
Yeah.
Amazing things with for bridges.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, so that's all stuff we can do. I mean, communities as well. I'm basically talking about Wi-Fi at this point, but if bridge communities would be also another brilliant thing to have that we could do stuff with. I mean, the thing that's all taken away here is that there are lots of nice things bridges will benefit from in future spec land. Many things we can do better.
Everybody will benefit from improved communities and extensible events, though. So, yeah. All right.
Every single person has ever joined.
I think we're coming to the end. So, thank you.
Yep.
See you soon.
No worries.
Thanks, Matrix Live.
Yeah.
Bye.